Tansy, hello and good morning, evening, afternoon, whatever time it is you're listening to this podcast. This is Laura with Research DEcolonized, brought to you by the BC Near. Today we are sitting down with the amazing Dr. Rheanna Robinson and learning about who she is, how she got where she is, and what she's doing. So, Rheanna, please introduce yourself with as much or little detail as you'd like. Where you're from, what community nation you're connected to, where you work, areas of research you're interested in, etc.
Good morning, Laura. Thank you for having me join you today. I'm really excited to be here and to speak to this podcast. My name is Rheanna Robinson. I am Métis and a member of the Manitoba Métis Federation, but I grew up in northern British Columbia my entire life in the little community of Smithers, BC. However, I've been living in Prince George on the traditional territory of the Lheidli Nation since the 1990s when I started attending university at the University of Northern British Columbia in Prince George. So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of First Nation Studies at UNBC, and my primary research areas are focused on Indigenous education and, more recently, Indigenous disability studies. So I have really been able to see my research areas and interests grow over time and have them evolve as my life itself has evolved, and new things have been something I've experienced over time, and it has become a really relevant and important time for me to realize and reimagine how my research interests are very much interrelated with each other and may have a large impact on multiple different Indigenous scholastic areas and opportunities for research.
Oh, thank you so much, Rheanna. Yes, it's very exciting to have you here, so thank you for coming. Interestingly, you decided to pursue a PhD. And I say interestingly because after having a career as both a student and a researcher over the last 3 to 4 years, I know that it takes a lot to actually commit to the completion of a PhD program where you're basically writing a book on your research. So I applaud you on that. Do you want to tell our listeners a bit about what led you to embark on this journey and why you chose to do your program in educational studies?
Sure, absolutely. I have been so fortunate to have been able to be part of a higher learning community since I graduated high school in 1995. And when Prince George first welcomed UNBC as a university in the north and a place for northern learners, well, a place for all learners, but particularly a welcoming space and an accessible space for students who otherwise were having to leave their families and go far from home. We could come to Prince George and be still in the north where our familiar environments and our friends and families live and work. And it was important for me to be a part of the UNBC community at a time when the university was really a welcoming and inviting space for not just Indigenous students and their cultures and what they're bringing to the institutional community, but the elders, the other Indigenous organizations that exist in Northern British Columbia. And it was an amazing space for me to learn so much more about myself, about where I'm from, about the history that is a part of my life, and things that I wanted to use within that regard. So originally, when I started university, I had full ambitions to become a high school teacher. And it was something that I wanted to do since I was a very, very young girl, approximately the age of 5, I would say, that I always wanted to teach in high school. I was fascinated by it. I was fascinated by the conceptualization of teaching and what a privilege that was to be a leader in a classroom space. So when I started at UNBC, I pursued an undergraduate degree in history and First Nation studies. And I was really captivated by the things I was learning in First Nation studies in particular. When I first started university, First Nation studies was still a fairly new scholarly area. And UNBC was, in fact, one of the first institutions in North America to be offering a master's degree in First Nation Studies and articulating what that may entail as part of a graduate student experience beyond what other universities were presenting at the time. Again, this is in the 1990s, the early 2000s. So when I finished my BA in History and First Nation Studies, I decided that I was going to pursue an MA in First Nation Studies in particular. And because I was so drawn to my own experiences in education as a student from the K to 12 system and realizing the immense gaps that I knew that I had not had an opportunity to learn about myself, about Indigenous history generally, and where I'm from, I decided that I was going to do my master's degree in the area and the focus of First Nations education. And I did, and it was amazing and utterly rewarding. I was able to pursue research related to Aboriginal choice schools and travel across our country and visit other amazing Aboriginal choice schools. So that's schools within the public school system that are embedding Indigenous philosophies, not just in their curricular structure, but the school spaces themselves, the school communities, and how the schools were really welcoming and embracing Indigenous knowledges and ways of being and knowing and doing in celebratory ways. So when I finished my master's degree, I decided after the fact I was really encouraged to pursue a PhD. And there was just opportunistically, a space at UBC for me to apply to their educational studies program. And I did, and I was accepted, and I was thrilled. And so again, I pursued my PhD, and it was in some respects an extension of my work in my master's degree, because I moved from doing my research around the experiences in a K to 12 public school system to really looking at Aboriginal post-secondary institutions in British Columbia and how they are being supported and operationalizing themselves within the context, again, of a multitude of public post-secondary institutions. So I, again, very fortunate that I was able to pursue the PhD. And, I'm very, very busy. I'm a mother of two boys who are also, they're members of the Nisga'a Nation. And I work full time. So I was extraordinarily busy, but it's absolutely fulfilling. And I enjoyed my pursuits during that PhD experience for sure.
Wow, that's so exciting. And out of curiosity, my own selfish curiosity over here. So, what did you find in your PhD then, with how Aboriginal post-secondary institutions, like how they're being supported amongst all of this? What did you actually find?
So Aboriginal Indigenous post-secondary institutions, it's interesting how the terminology has changed even in the short time. I finished my PhD in 2016, and the title of my PhD work is Aboriginal Post-Secondary Institutes, but it's now moved into the realm of Indigenous post-secondary institutes. And, there are dozens of Indigenous post-secondary institutes in British Columbia, but my research area primarily focused on three. The Nicola Valley Institute of Technology, which is BC's only Indigenous public post-secondary institute, the Wilplahos Nisga'a Institute, which is an affiliated institution that is in the Nass Valley in northwestern BC, and the former Caribou Chilcotin Weekend University program, which was a program that was running out of the Williams Lake region for a number of years, and which I taught for in the mid-2000s, that served 3 nations and 15 different bands in the Williams Lake region, and many other people. Anyone was able to attend the Caribou Chilcotin Weekend University program. But I was really in my research trying to interrogate and understand some of the opportunities and challenges that Indigenous post-secondary institutes are experiencing comparatively to public post-secondary institutes in BC. So some of the things that I really was able to learn is that elders have a core role and are extraordinarily valuable members within the institutional communities of Indigenous post-secondary institutes. Also, that Indigenous post-secondary institutes are remarkable and exemplary in partnership and relationship building within and amongst each other, and also within the public post-secondary realm. So it was really, despite systemic challenges associated with funding and just resourcing generally, Indigenous post-secondary institutes are remarkably thriving and able to serve community in a way that really meets their needs and really is answering questions that communities want to see resolved. So it was a very, very rewarding experience where I was able to build a lot of relationships, meet some amazing people, and be able to translate some really important knowledges that I think filled some gaps that exist within the context of understanding Indigenous post-secondary institutes in BC.
Thank you for expanding on that. I know I just threw that question out of nowhere. And just to follow up again, I know Nicola Valley Institute is still going strong, and you mentioned that they are thriving. Are the other two still thriving right now? Are they still available for students to register in, etc.?
Wilpla Institute absolutely is thriving and expanding and growing. And there are so many unique opportunities that are being offered to members of the Nisga'a Nation and beyond. And, every year it's really, I feel so fortunate to be able to have opportunities to celebrate with graduates from the nation and from the Institute themselves as through the convocation experience. The Caribou Chilcotin Weekend University Program, which was it was a partnership program between a number of public post-secondary institutes and also the communities themselves. It is not in operation as it previously existed. However, there are still other extensions that have emerged as a result of having the CCWU, which is what I've called it in my research, in existence, like I said, in the early and mid 2000s.
Okay, that's great to hear. And that's probably important for some listeners who may be interested in attending an Indigenous post-secondary institution or someone they know. So thank you for expanding on that.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, if people are interested, there is a lot of information available online about Indigenous post-secondary institutions in BC, and it can be found within a very quick Google search, and there's lots of information.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Rheanna. Yeah, gotta love Google, hey, nowadays.
Yes.
Being able to hop on. So that's great to know, because again, my auntie, she went to Nicola Valley, but other than that, I actually wasn't aware of the other two. So very great to know. Just to give some context to our listeners in the direction that I'm going to pull us. You and I, we recently, but not so recently, I guess it was in early summer, we reconnected at BC Near's GER conference, and we had the chance to chat about your newer research interests that you brought up in your introduction, specifically around Indigenous disability. So what actually inspired you to make a shift? I know you mentioned that, in this work you're doing, it's very interrelated to the work you did previously, but it's still going from Indigenous-led post-secondary institutions all the way to looking at Indigenous disability and the context around that. It's different enough to where I'm like, what inspired you to make this shift, and how's that process been going for you as you've embarked on this new area of research?
Thanks, Laura. It's a long process. And again, like I alluded to earlier, some of it has been directly associated with my own life journey. So I'm going to back up a little bit and describe how in my early academic experience, my first degree experience, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 19 years old. Mm-hmm. And so multiple sclerosis is a neurological health condition that's degenerative in nature. And when I was initially diagnosed, I was diagnosed with relapsing, remitting multiple sclerosis. And approximately 6, almost 7 years ago, I would say, I've transitioned into what they call a secondary progressive form of the illness. So I've moved into a realm where previously, for the first 20 years of me living with MS, I did not exhibit any noticeable symptoms that people would be able to see. That didn't mean that I wasn't experiencing MS symptoms every day and very symptomatic every day. I knew things were going on with my body. I could feel that I was having changes happening. But with the evolution of my transition to secondary progressive MS and my very distinct reality of having a newfound process of navigation in the world with mobility limitations, I realized that I was starting to contend with a whole new set of realities and somewhat of an identity crisis of trying to understand how I was navigating the world as an Indigenous disabled academic and mother and daughter and auntie and person generally. So I really knew that I needed to start to expand on that understanding, both in my personal life, but also my professional life. So as an academic, and I'm somebody that relies on mobility aids to move around and to be able to participate in the world as much as I possibly can and as much as I want to. So it really has demanded for me to take a step back and see some of the relatedness and the really important relevancy between my fundamental background of Indigenous education as a scholar, but now also my new sort of discovery of disability studies generally, but where there is a gap as related to Indigenous experiences and disability studies. So that's really where the shift of my work has gone. And I'm calling my work in the category of Indigenous disability studies because I do feel that I am embarking on a very under-researched and underrepresented sphere of disability studies conversation. And it's really exciting for me to be part of this work and for me to be having such engaging and inspiring conversations with people that are so interested in learning more about not just traditional Indigenous perspectives of disability, but contemporary experiences and how we're really moving through these contested spaces of marginalization and discrimination generally. So it's a very newfound intersectional sphere that I've always felt I've embodied these different spaces of intersectionality, but this is another level of it, and it's really exciting.
It's so exciting, and it's just so important for you to be undertaking on this work. And I'm really curious, so far, perhaps I'll say, whereabouts are you on this journey? What have you started accomplishing or have done so far? And what directions are you hoping to take with this research? Like, what is your overall goal? And how do you envision it benefiting individuals and communities eventually? And if you need me to repeat any of those questions because I threw like 4 at you in a row, please let me know. But yeah.
Oh, it's all good. And I mean, I can talk about this so much. It really has become a stark reality to me, the embedded relationship and impact of colonization on disability identity generally. So the overlapping between my experiences as an Indigenous person and the colonial impacts of that, and then with the influence and interrelatedness again of colonization, ableism, ableist discrimination, and disability identities is it's another layer. It's another evolution of my own undertaking to understand and interrogate this space of research that I feel has not been largely represented. Indigenous peoples, suffer discrimination associated with being part of a particularly culturally distinct group of people. But there's also the marginalization that we contend with of disabled people generally. So my research is really moving into the sphere of firstly trying to bring forward an understanding traditional Indigenous perspectives of disability. Because I think it's really important that people know that disability itself is undeniably a socially constructed identity. My most recent research that I've undertaken has been with a small First Nation in the northwest coast of BC. And I've really had an opportunity to learn about the importance of kinship systems, the relationality that is absolutely imperative and foundational to community, the necessity to consider differences amongst people, not as a categorization of disability, but as something that has been offered to individuals in the world as a gift, as a way of seeing and experiencing things unlike able-bodied persons. It also has really shown me that not all Indigenous nations even had a word for disability in their languages. They don't have it in many, many languages. So that in itself speaks really loudly to me about the necessity to take a step back and consider disability from a different perspective and a different lens. Healthy peoples, healthy communities in so many Indigenous ways of being, knowing, and doing really embody so much more than just how we are able to, navigate the world through able-bodied circumstances. It's our relationship with the land. It's our relationship with each other. It's our relationship with the spirit world. It's so holistic and so absolutely embedded in who we are and how we need to be, knowing that we deserve and belong to having a voice and to having our own perspective and interpretation. So my research is really moving. Firstly, I'm just finishing the paper. I really want to be able to have my work published that I've just completed, because I want to take it then a step further and really start to present how it's important that First Nations perspectives of disability are being included in conceptions of policy, conceptions of practice, and conceptions of understanding. Indigenous peoples are disproportionately affected by disability compared to non-Indigenous peoples. And it just, to me, speaks even louder as to why we need to be having a more broad and thorough understanding of these experiences, the histories of these experiences, and why we're in the place we are today of needing to be further understanding this. I'll just end by saying, the silencing of histories is not healthy. And disability history is also a history that has been silenced. And I would say Indigenous disability history has been further silenced and needs to be brought more boldly into the forefront of conversation.
I wish you could see me on this end. I've been nodding my head like so much to what you've said. So thank you for that answer. And I'd like to also comment on your last point there. It definitely is something that I think is neglected, or we don't hear about it as much. Based on my own lived experience, I don't have a ton of families who are living and breathing and experiencing disability as well. But even in post-sec, like undergrad courses where we're learning about health and holistic health and even Indigenous health and wellness, it's definitely not included in the curriculum, at least not specific to Indigenous peoples. You'll hear a note of mention of like how varying disabilities impact quality of life. But yeah, that's definitely not something that comes to the forefront of the mind, despite how significant and important it is for overall health and wellness. Yeah.
It's true. And, when disability gets included within primarily like scholarly spaces, a lot of the discussion and the dialogue is around, different models of disability and how that, impacts and translates, and sort of the really, really, the disability scholars are just phenomenal. And I've just been so immersed in learning because this is a shift for me. So I do feel like I'm under a lot of, I'm under a lot of new a new guidance. There's new languages that I'm learning. There's new ways that I'm really trying to understand the scholarship that's in front of me. And, there has been that this stark reality to me that while there exists all of these different models of disability that so much of our world has been constructed around, in Canada, it's particularly the social model of disability, there doesn't exist an Indigenous model of disability. So I do see, again, this space for inclusion, this space for belonging, and this space for awareness that has not always been, known about or even had an opportunity to be integrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited. You'll have to keep me and our listeners even posted on when you submit your paper and when it's coming out in what journal, because I'd love to look into what you found and what you actually did. And I know you, with confidentiality, can't expand on too much of that right now. So I'm just excited for that. So a little bit of a sidebar, but not. I just think this is such an important thing to touch on. As an Indigenous woman working in academe, who also obviously went through post-secondary, do you feel supported within this work and the work that you're doing? And if yes, how? And if no, can you describe any obstacles that you have faced or are currently facing?
Yeah, I've been really, really fortunate in my post-secondary journey experience, Laura. I really have been. I'm going to partly attribute that to being at UNBC, at a small institution where I was able to forge very strong and long-standing relationships, not just with faculty, but with my peers, the students that I met way back when I was still a teenager. And I was able to, these are things that are longstanding, I'm still in communication with. And I've always felt this very strong circle of support and celebration. I came to university in a very exploratory phase of my life, still trying to understand who I am, still trying to understand the history I come from, and still trying to really put into perspective how I was navigating these spaces that encompassed so many parameters of shame and uncertainty, and not feeling as though I had the right to belong or celebrate a history that I was still learning about. And, university really at UNBC for me was a transformative space in that regard. And I definitely inserted myself very intentionally into spheres and spaces and in relationships where I could be welcomed in a safe and supported way. And indeed I was. So by just being encouraged generally to celebrate more of who I am and to not be ashamed that I was in an exploratory learning phase of myself, but on the other hand, quite oppositely, to just really know that that was part of something I needed to share, I needed to talk about. And I did. So university really created a strong space for me to be in a really good way, learn about those tenets that have carried me through. And, I always talk about the 4R methodology. Rheanna Kirkness and Ray Barnhart came up with this paper about post-secondary, Indigenous post-secondary students' experiences in higher education. And, respect, reciprocity, responsibility, and relevance have always kind of framed and reemerged over and over and over again in my life, not just within my research, but within my life practices generally. And as a student and scholar in academe, I've definitely always used every opportunity I can to remind people about how important it is that we encompass those spheres of understanding and those spheres of really being respectful to each other. So I've been supported, whether it's through, like I said, that mentorship capacity. I've also been supported through scholarship opportunities. I've been supported through conference and event opportunities. I have had some remarkable research assistantships that I've been able to participate on. And now, as a faculty member, I can in turn offer to my students. And so it's really, again, embodying the principles of the 4 Rs, and that space of reciprocity has been really absolutely fundamental to my own evolution and growth as an academic, as an Indigenous academic in higher education.
I love that. And yeah, what you said there, I think that's kind of how, at least for me, and if I was to recommend, which the question is not for me, but you find your people, right? Like you find that niche, that area, that group of people who just kind of help you get through those times. And academia, it's not just a walk in the park. I mean, maybe for some people, but it's great that you're able to find so much support. I know you kind of answered this already, but is there any other type of advice you'd like to leave for those listening who are interested in a career in academia or want to pursue Indigenous health and wellness research? Like what else would you recommend if there is anything?
Well, I often get asked, just with my experiences of living with multiple sclerosis, what is your best advice? And I always tell people that we have to be our best advocates. And I would relate this to my experience in academia as well. I've had to be my best advocate. I've had to really take the reins and ensure that I am finding opportunities that I'm passionate about, that I'm getting a really important space of not just satisfaction for the work that I'm doing, but where I'm feeling that my contributions are welcomed and my contributions are in fact able to have an impact. So I'm going to say that, being able to find spaces to be our best advocates and be our own supporters, our own cheerleaders in moving us through these spaces is really important. Being in academia I'm going to say this because it's true for me anyways, can often be a very lonely experience. The lonesomeness of moving through and the long evenings of writing and reading and researching and, just moving into these uncomfortable spaces sometimes of where we have to navigate practices and policies we're not sure of. It can be frustrating, but it's important to know that there are so many people that are here to support each other, and really in that space of encouragement and that space of moving forward is absolutely critical. So that would probably be my best advice right now.
Thank you so much. That's so important to hear, I think, for all of the listeners and myself included. um, so we're BC Near itself, like we're an organization. We strive to support scholars like yourself who are doing such important work. What are some ways that we as BC Near can support your projects and passions, or that you think we could do to support the projects and passions of other bright scholars like yourself?
I think B Senior has been offering such amazing opportunities for students and for people like myself. I was the recipient of a pilot project award in the category of new scholars, and it has been just such a remarkable springboard for me to look forward to being able to apply for other grant opportunities. One of the ways I think that BC Near could even expand it further is having more prominent co-applicant opportunities, for example, whether that be with an elder or a student more formally, but providing those spaces for the co-applicant application process would be amazing. And perhaps it might just sort of, enlarge the BC Near circle even further. And, UNBC, for example, is in such a, it serves such a vast region of our province. And there are so many different Indigenous communities and so many different spaces that is an opportunity to create and co-create relationships in a really good way. That may be one space that could be explored further.
Yes, that's such great feedback. Thank you so much. Um, I also wanted to just second that UNBC. I don't know if a lot of people know this or this was just me, but I lived in Prince George for 4 or 5 years. And it probably took me until the last year to realize, like, we're always referring to up north because I'm from the interior. We're like smack dab in the middle of the province. So UNBC is one of the only institutions there, right? Like that's serving the whole other half of the entire province. And there are a lot of rich, amazing communities up there. And I say rich as in like culture, not necessarily finances. So yeah, that's a great point. Such a great point. And I've asked you a ton of questions, but is there anything else you wanted to share about your work or bring up before I let you go that you didn't have a chance to touch on?
Well, really, Laura, this was a really wonderful opportunity for me to share more about what I'm doing and where I'm excited to see myself going. And again, I think I'll end by saying that I'm looking forward to there being a more prominent and celebratory integration of Indigenous disability studies. And it's really important to me that we start to move away from a deficit orientated model of trying to understand these experiences, because I think that there is such a rich and not well understood profiling and resource of culturally important and relevant experiences that continue to celebrate and continue to move up in the world of scholastic conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rheanna. It's been so great to talk to you. It's really exciting stuff you have coming up and that you're in the works on. And I just wish the best to you.
Thanks, Laura. So nice to talk with you today.
Thank you again. So, yes, this was Research Decolonized, sitting down with Dr. Rheanna Robinson for Inspiring Indigenous Scholars mini-series. If you have any questions for our guest or comments about this post, feel free to reach out and send me an email at Laura McNabb-Coombs, that's LauraMcNabCoombs @ uvic.ca. Bye for now.